seat belts. This was back when we all had bench seats. My father was a smoker, his window was open. Somebody ran a red light, hit the car spun around. I flew out his window onto the El Camino Real. If I'd hit the steering wheel, I probably would have died. If I'd hit the doorpost, I probably would have died. I landed on the ground, I still have a scar in my head. None of the cars that were moving ran over me. I survived. Again, no recollection. Last night in the news, you might have heard the story, a gentleman in a lake in eastern Nevada went out on a wave runner or jet ski, and without a life jacket, he either jumped or fell off, and he didn't resurface, and they found his body yesterday. He was a skilled mariner, they said. Why didn't he survive? I don't know. You know, it's some of us do, some of us don't. We just had an accident a quarter mile to the south of us. We hope, as Jim said, that everyone was okay, but we don't know. Some people survive, some don't. A friend of ours in Tennessee wanted to kayak a river near him, and his wife dropped him off, and he gave her instructions. I'll meet you at this park at 4. If I'm not there by 5, call the sheriff. He wasn't there at 5. He went over a waterfall. The nose of his kayak hit a rock. It stopped. He didn't. He landed in the water. He landed on a rock also. The kayak kept going. The sides of the river were very steep. He couldn't hike out. It was the middle of the afternoon. He swam to shore, realized that no one would be able to see him, swam back out to a rock in the middle of the river, wearing a swimsuit, a t-shirt, and a life jacket. Then the sun went down, and it got very cold. The next morning at daylight, the sheriff's rescue squad went out, including a brand new deputy, first day on the job. They were given sectors of the river to search. The young deputy went out to his sector. He looked down, he saw Gary on this rock, called in everybody. The rescue people rappelled down, put our friend in a litter, got him up, took him to the hospital. He was hypothermic. He survived. Why did he survive? Who knows? Oh, by the way, the young deputy said, I didn't know it was going to be this easy. Wow. You know, they should have given him lots of money and sent him to Las Vegas. Anyone that lucky? Wow. Jane was diagnosed with cancer 4 years, 2 months and a half ago, and with ocular melanoma. It metastasized to her liver, and we started going to UC San Francisco every 3 weeks. They ran out of treatment plans. She started going to UCLA, where she's on a clinical trial. The drugs are working extremely well. Pardon me. She's a survivor.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
Lots of prayers.
Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you, one of the prayers that I say, and dear Lord, please keep your loving arms wrapped around her, and which he has, and you kind people have really helped. I say one for myself. I said, dear Lord, keep your loving arm wrapped around my shoulder and keep your hand over my mouth.
He keeps moving.
He doesn't hear that all the time.
Off of mine, yeah.
Yeah. And he should. Again, when I was 5, we moved to Santa Cruz, 3 blocks off the beach. I was about 7. I started going to the beach by myself, could ride my bike down. And a bunch of kids from my school, we had our own little gang, and we body surfed and we skin dived and all that kind of stuff. This is before wetsuits. Santa Cruz, the water in the summertime is about 60 degrees. One of the kids in our group, her name was Lori. Her uncle came up every summer from Los Angeles for about 2 weeks with his 2 sons. His sons were about our age, but they never interacted with us. Her uncle taught us how to wear fins, wear a mask, snorkel, clear it, And he played with us every day for at least an hour a day. He had a TV show that was filmed in Crystal River, Florida called Sea Hunt. And he was one of the coolest guys I ever met. Big buff guy. His sons were kind of jerks, but they grew up and turned out all right. Bo and Jeff. But he got us really interested in spending more and more time in water. Later, I became a water safety instructor, scuba diver instructor, so on and so forth, and also a sailor. I started sailing in Santa Cruz before the harbor was built down there. Come on in. Do not apologize. Anyway, I started sailing in small boats. I was hooked. They might as well have given me heroin. All I wanted to do was sail and be on the water. Hey, planet Earth is 2/3 water. We're 2/3 water. What a coincidence. 1990. Well, both Jane and I were special agents with the U.S. Customs Service. We worked in San Francisco, and I was racing sailboats back then, and we were racing sailboats back then. In 1995, we decided to buy a cruising boat, a Morgan 45 center cockpit that was built in Largo, Florida. It was owned by the owner of the company, Catalina Yachts. We bought it in Annapolis. We left it back there for 6 months. Then we shipped it to San Francisco, and we sailed San Francisco for 5 years before Jane, transferred to Washington, D.C., and I retired. Special agents can retire when they're 50, and they must retire when they're 57. And I'd spent a lot of my career undercover, infiltrating drug cartels, something called the Medellin cartel, you might have heard of it. And it was very dangerous. And we decided if I survived to age 50 that I would retire, and that's what I did. The plan was I retired the last day of 1999, the night that the lights were going to go out and the banks wouldn't open, and Y2K, and we were at our yacht club in San Francisco, and at midnight, nothing changed. So one of our friends, his mother took $100,000 out of her bank accounts and put it in her safety deposit box so that she would have ready cash when Y2K happened. And then her son said, "Mom, how are you going to get into the safe deposit box?" She hadn't quite thought it through.
Yeah.
So anyway, that didn't happen. So New Year's Day, next morning, Jane and I and a friend of ours named Grace, we took off from San Francisco and sailed south. And we got to Marina del Rey, and when we were within 5 miles of Marina del Rey, we ran out of fuel. Bad planning on Jane's part. So Grace, Jane, and I sailed for almost 6 hours to do the last 5 miles. We sailed into a fuel dock at 5 minutes to 6. The fuel dock closed at 6, but they stayed and gave us gas, or diesel, excuse me. Jane and Grace, they flew out that evening. Grace went back to San Francisco. Jane flew back to Washington, D.C. to mix it up with all those wonderful people back there. I started harbor hopping down the coast, and I went to San Diego, where I spent about 6 weeks putting a generator on the boat and a water maker. We were going to go on a long sail, and fresh water is very important. So, excuse me, when that ended, a friend of mine from Hawaii flew out, Bob, and a friend from Santa Cruz flew down, Mark, and we started harbor hopping down the Mexican coast, down to Costa Rica, and onto the Panama Canal. Jane joined us in Acapulco. We got to see the famous cliff divers and all that kind of stuff. She flew down to Panama, where we spent a week with friends there while waiting to get into the queue to go through the canal with a large ship. We transited the canal in 1 day, which was pretty cool. We went from the Pacific Ocean to the Atlantic, or Caribbean, really. And then Jane and friends took a bus back to Panama, Mark left, and a friend of ours from Washington D.C., Laura, joined us, and we sailed over to the San Blas Islands, which are 365 beautiful coconut palms, crabs, white sandy beaches that are occupied by the Kuna Indians. We spent a couple of days cruising there, then went over to Cartagena, Colombia, which I was a little nervous about. I was persona non grata in Colombia, but no one knew me by my real name. When you're undercover, you have all kinds of personas, and I had several. There, Laura left, and another friend, Bob, flew in from Sonoma, California, and we're going to do the short jaunt due north to Cartagena, Colombia. It's only 500 miles. It would have taken us about 3.5 days. The weather forecast was for benign seas. I was looking for something as flat as this floor, and we took off, and within hours, the wind started to build. You know that weather forecasters get paid whether they're right or wrong?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Believe me.
It's just amazing. So we took off, and as the day progressed, the wind and waves got larger. The wind and the waves were out of the northeast, and we're going due north. And we started going up and over waves and down. Just before sunset, we saw quite a few logs, this big around, some 20 feet long, some 30, some 40. They looked like telephone poles. And we were so thankful that we saw them in daylight. Not thinking that perhaps they had cousins somewhere in the Caribbean waiting for us. As the night progressed, the wind kept building, the waves kept building. And let me stop here. There's 3 of us, and we were on 90-minute watches. So whoever was on watch would sit behind the wheel. Excuse me. I think the pollen's getting to me. They would look at the instruments, the autopilot, but they would scan the horizon, looking for ships. Because coming out of Panama, the ships go from southwest to northeast, and they either go to the United States or they're going to Europe. The off watch, one could go below and sit on the low side, go to sleep on the low side, and then in the cockpit we had a great big beanbag chair that you could wiggle your way down into, and it was very comfortable, and you could either nod off or stay awake and tell jokes with whoever was on watch. So that's what we were doing. About 4 a.m., we went off a particularly large wave. We believe the bow went through a 26-foot arc. We went up and fell down, and the bow shuddered, and a microsecond later, the starboard side of the boat shuddered, and I thought we'd hit something. I was on watch. I went below with flashlight, looked around. Everything was fine. I looked under cushions. I looked in the engine room. Nothing was going on. That was at 4 in the morning, 0400. At 5 a.m., Buzz, who was asleep on the leeward settee, yelled, "There's hissing down here." Well, on a boat, that usually means a hose has come off an engine and there's steam coming out. So I opened up the engine room and I looked. Both the generator and the engine were running perfectly, but there was this much water underneath them. And unfortunately, that wasn't the lowest part of the boat. I opened a hatch up and water started seeping into the cabin. We were 120 miles due north of Cartagena, Colombia, 380 miles from Montego, Jamaica. And the wind and the waves were getting larger and larger. By the way, since my retirement, I've had 2 jobs. Back up just a little. This is one of them. Yep, I'm the Easter Bunny.
Oh my gosh.
And that's me up there. I was the captain on the MS Dixie out of Zephyr Cove for 9 seasons.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, until it became like a real job. Well, I'd had a real job and I really didn't need to deal with personnel things. I just wanted to drive boats. And so I gave that up. This is our Morgan 45 Painkiller. Wonderful, comfortable boat that I was going to take to Annapolis. But meanwhile, back in the Caribbean, things are looking a little bit dismal. Water started seeping up through the floorboards, and somebody was asking about my life jacket earlier. We had 3 or 4 different kinds of life jackets. The horseshoe collar that you see that you can buy for $5, and then we had inflatable life jackets that you put over, and when a salt pill melted, they would self-inflate. So if you fell in the water would melt the salt pill, and that's what happened. Because we were bouncing around, those life jackets fell on the salon sole, the floor, and the water seeping up melted those things, and that was the hissing. We also had Type 1 offshore life jackets that are great big bulky things, but it'll keep your head out of the water about a foot or so. And those came into play later. So Buzz and I started looking for the source of the water. We couldn't find it. We slowed the boat down. We had a dead downwind, and we put the engine on idle speed, and that slowed our speed of advance, and it also put us on a course for Panama, the Panama Canal. Unfortunately, that was 200 miles away. Daylight was coming, and we thought that we had a great chance of being rescued before the boat sank. Our initial guess, by the way, we thought there was about 10 gallons of water coming in a minute. We were off by about 200 gallons. It was a slight error in math. The further below sea level the hole is, the more pressure pushing the water in. Yeah. So there's your physics lesson for today. Gosh, who knew? Our main bilge pump died. It gave its all. When I touched it, it was nice and hot. Buzz got the handle of the manual pump, and he was pumping on that, and he was expelling 10 gallons a minute while we were taking on over 200. I was the youngster on this trip. I was 50, Buzz was 55, Bob was 57. Things were getting dicey. My concern as the owner and captain was that if anyone got injured, the chances of them surviving would be greatly diminished. So posted under the ladder going up to the cockpit, we had an abandoned ship plan. If we had to abandon ship, these are the things we'd look for. And every time somebody new came on the boat, I gave a safety briefing. Here are all the first aid kits. Here's the abandoned ship plan. These are where all the life jackets are. On and on. So Jane, when we were in Acapulco, she said, because she'd heard this, even though she's the owner too, she'd heard this talk dozens of times. She says, you need to formalize that. Oh, get out the computer, print it out, post it. So knowing there's more water coming in than we could expel, I told everybody to get up in the cockpit. We had a little meeting, and I said, we need to go through our abandoned ship plan, and we're going to activate one of the EPIRBs. An EPIRB is an emergency position indicating radio beacon, and we had 2 on board. We had one in the computer that we use for communicating. I'm just learning English. And on that one, you held down 2 buttons for about 5 seconds. It made a horrible audible alarm, but it let you know that the signal was going out. The signal went out an antenna up to a satellite. It was downloaded in Newfoundland, and it went by internet to Miami to the Rescue Coordination Center that the Coast Guard has.
Sounds like that.
If it's for me, I'm
Interesting.
It's Miami on the phone.
God,
I know, yeah.
God.
Well, I'm gonna tell you about that. So, we went and packed. And this is my sea bag. This is the same one. I tend to keep things forever and ever. And Jane's kept me for 43 years, so. This is a floppy disk. Can be used as a signal mirror. They work really good. This is a whistle. These are things that are around my neck that morning. This is a mirror that you can actually aim, and we did. When you're putting this stuff on, you're not having a great day. This isn't like this afternoon we're going to go to a movie. This is serious stuff. And so we all don these things, whistles and mirrors. I packed a handheld VHF radio, kept it in a charger. I packed a flashlight, a Leatherman tool. Are you familiar with these? They have like 20 gadgets and only 2 work. I packed several rigging knives. This is a rigging knife that you have on a boat. It has a fit on it. I packed binoculars. The Coast Guard had upgraded their binoculars, and they gave me a pair of 1942 U.S. Navy Bosch & Lomb binoculars. That's what these are. The optics are superior. I buy these on eBay nowadays because the original that they gave me went away, and I'll tell you about that in a second. Anyone want to look through these? I'll put them over there. But when I travel delivering yachts, I take those with me. I had a mini mag light. I had a handheld GPS, gave us our course and speed while we were drifting. I packed one pair of shorts and the ship's documents, the ship's cash. I had $2,500 cash on me. I had purchased some emerald jewelry for Jane in Cartagena. She, what did I get? A ring and
necklace. I don't have it on, but
a ring and earrings.
And a necklace.
Later, you wanted the necklace.
okay.
Yeah. Well, when I was in Cartagena, she was in Puerto Rico, and we're communicating by email. So that went in there. My wallet went in there. Zipped it up, handed it up on deck. The other guys did the same thing with their gear, and I'd lit off the EPIRB. EPIRBs only work one way. You turn it on, you assume it's working, but you don't get any feedback. So you have to wait. And we're in the middle of the Caribbean. We're closer to Colombia than we are the United States. Our lives were in other people's hands. We were doing what we could to survive, but if we were going to survive, pretty good looking, huh? As the water was coming up, we still needed to get a few things. Bob wanted his glasses, but by now the water in the salon was about this deep. And to go below, you went down the ladder and you climbed on top of the furniture, and I retrieved his glasses. I wouldn't let the other guys go below because I was the youngster and it was my boat. So we grabbed a gallon of orange juice and a gallon of lemonade. Bob poured out the orange juice, went below and got a gallon of water, which is far more important. We grabbed some foodstuffs, and on the back of the boat we had a radar arch with our tender on it, and that was going to be our life raft. We removed the outboard motor from the tender, threw it in the sea, the gas can, and it had a seat in the middle, and with a rigging knife, I very carefully cut out the seat, because we, in these big waves, we wanted to be as low as possible. The back deck, we had all kinds of things. We had scuba gear and all this stuff, everything we tossed in the sea. And one of the things that still bothers me today, we threw in the US ensign. We couldn't take any chances on anything getting tangled. At 6:20, Buzz yelled out, there's a ship passing to the north of us. And about a half mile to the north, we saw a freighter passing by. I hailed him on the VHF, no response. I had a flare gun with 18 skyrockets. You're only required to have 3, but I always kept the outdated ones, and every one of the outdated ones worked. I fired off a half a dozen skyrockets, no response. In 10 minutes they were gone. We didn't see them. We actually thought they were going to rescue us, and we were going to not even get our feet dry. At 7 o'clock, Buzz and I unfurled the Genoa, the big forward sail, and we let it fly out in front of us for more visibility. We knew the boat was going to sink. You know, we weren't holding anything back. It didn't help. At 7:45, Buzz and I launched the raft, and the line that's attached to it is called a painter. I tended the painter, Buzz got in it, and we let it drift back. And meanwhile, Bob is in the cockpit steering the boat. A little while before, everything died on the boat. All the batteries were flooded out. The engine stopped, the generator stopped, the instruments stopped. It was very quiet except for the howling of the wind through the rigging. The wind was in the high 30s, low 40s by that time. So Buzz is in the tender. Water is starting to come in the cockpit. The boat is in a bow down angle. This end is at a slight angle downward, but the water is coming more further and further aft, back. Bob yelled, the water's coming in the cockpit, it's time to go. If you knew Bob, you know that he's a klutz. If there's a way to get cut and start bleeding, he's figured it out. Running from that speaker to me towards the back of the boat, he got his foot caught in the coil of line of the painter, the line that I'm tending. The boat is now rapidly going down by the bow, and we're going uphill towards the stern, and I'm yelling, jump, 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 because I can't jump until he does. He's doing this like a dog, and it finally frees, and we both jump in. The boat's vertical, the transom's about this high out of the water, but it's going down. We'd seen the movie Titanic. We know that good things do not happen when the boat goes down. Mm-hmm. We jump clear. We're in 12, 15-foot waves. We swim over to Buzz. He helps us into the raft. Stuff is popping up. Books, bottles, charts, all kinds of stuff that we don't need. We get in the raft, and in 2 minutes, the debris field is gone. We're drifting at over 2 knots, about 3 miles an hour. 20 minutes into our ordeal, we find ourselves upside down under the raft. None of us have any recollection of a wave flipping us over. We're just there. We get out from under the raft. Buzz goes to one side, Bob and I on the others, and we flip the thing over. We have our 2 gallons of water and lemonade tied to the raft. We have our sea bags tied to the raft. We climb back in, but we realize we can't do this too many more times. We're not 25 or 30 anymore. We're full-grown adults. The wind and the waves keep getting larger. A little while later, Buzz says, there's a ship coming towards us. And it was passing to the south side of us, about a quarter mile away. It was close enough where we could see the welds on the steel plate. I got out the handheld radio, I hailed him. I fired a half a dozen skyrockets. We held up a great big orange plastic placard, waving it. We were blowing our whistles. Now, blowing our whistles, from one end of the raft to where Jane is, we're shouting at each other. We couldn't hear because of the wind. So our whistles they were useless. We were flashing our mirrors on the bridge. We could see it. And in 5 minutes, they were gone. We were not despondent. And by the way, let me bring this up. All three of us, retired guys, were retired customs agents and military veterans. During this whole process, nobody got upset, nobody got excited, there was no crying. We just went about our business trying to survive. We did what we could in hopes that other people were doing what they could, and it turns out they were. I did lose my binoculars from the Coast Guard. I was very upset about that, but we didn't have much to see anyway. It took us about 7 waves going up and down to scan the entire surface. When you're going up these waves, you're going up and down, you're on top for a nanosecond, you'd see a little sector go down, come back up, because we were constantly looking for ships. Oh, by the way, our raft was white. Perfect when you're in white caps. You know, day glow orange, day glow yellow. Nah, we had white. About an hour after the ship passed, I thought I heard aircraft noises. And I yelled to Buzz, and he said, start signaling. And we're going, we couldn't tell where the noise was coming from, and it was gone in a few seconds. And by the way, the whole time we're doing this, we're bailing. The spume coming off the tops, it's filling up the raft. I had a very large sponge. Buzz and Bob opened up fruit juice boxes, drank it, and they were using that to bail. And because the raft was so small, we're kind of doing it behind ourselves. But we're constantly wet and starting to get cold. Can you get hypothermia in the tropics? Yes. We're operating at 98 to 99 degrees. The water in the Caribbean at that time was between 81 and 83 degrees. The wind and the water were sucking the heat out of our bodies, especially our heads, and we were headed on a downward slope towards 81 degrees. Not good. If there had been no wind, our time that we could have survived on the water would have been much greater. Anyway, I thought I heard the aircraft noise at 11:40. It went away. And at 11:50, 10 minutes later, I heard it again, but this time a great big white airplane dropped out from under the clouds and started turning. I dug into my sea bag, I grabbed the handheld radio, and I said, "It's us, turn." And they said, "Painkiller, this is the United States Coast Guard." I had not used our name. I knew they were looking for me, for us. And I knew that our chances of dying that day were greatly diminished. I told them which way to turn. When they were lined up on us, by this time, C-130, they were 5 miles downrange. I got them perfectly lined up. I got out one of my last 2 skyrockets, fired it. They said, "We have you in sight." And they stopped, they dropped a smoke flare. It's a canister about this long. Jim, how long are smoke flares? About this long,
pretty long,
this
yeah.
big around. They're counterbalanced. They hit the ocean and the smoke starts coming out. Them being ballast, they stayed in place, but we were still drifting about 2.2 knots towards Panama. The co-pilot is the one who talks on the radio, and he started interrogating us. How many souls on board? We each had one. That's a horrible question to ask.
What they say, yeah.
Where are you hailing from? San Francisco. What's your intended destination? Annapolis, Maryland. Then he said, you know that commercial airplanes go from San Francisco to Annapolis. And that's when I knew we weren't gonna die. He asked our medical condition. We were all great. We're doing good. No one was injured. He asked if they could drop a larger raft. And I said, well, how close could you get it? And the waves were pretty big. And he said 50 to 100 yards. I said, I'll get back to you. So we had a little team meeting. They want to drop a larger raft. They can get it 50 to 100 yards. Can we swim from here to there? Bob or Buzz said, why don't you ask him how long it's going to be until a ship comes? Hey, that's a great question. So I said, how long is it going to be? And they said about 45 minutes. And we'd been in the raft now for a little over 4 hours, pretty quick. And we said, we will stay in the raft. How long are you guys going to hang around? And they said, we're going to be with you until you're on a hard steel deck. And I said, if I could get up in your airplane right now, I'd French kiss every one of you. Roger that, kiss. They're very professional. So, on our raft, we had the second EPIRB tied. This is what an EPIRB looks like. There's a big coil of string on one side, and it floats, and we had it tied to our raft. So they were tracking us with our second signal. And I'll get back to that. So, next thing we hear is a ship talking to the airplane. Captain, can the raft propel itself towards us? It's very rough out. And I'm going, you think it's rough? You ought to see it from my perspective. Our head is a foot above water. We can't see anything. And this guy on an 880-foot ship is saying, it's rough out? Oh, well. So I spoke directly. I said, no. I said, we're drifting 2.2 knots towards Panama. So a few minutes later, we started to see the ship come into view. Meanwhile, the airplane, Coast Guard C-130 1717, was flying ellipses, a big sausage, if you will. Sometimes they were right overhead. Sometimes they were a quarter mile away, sometimes a half mile, sometimes further. And we thought, they're getting camera angles, you know? No, they couldn't find us. The white caps were so big, and our 10-foot white tender life raft, they couldn't find us. But we were so sure, oh, they gotta have video. You know? So the ship comes into view, and then a couple of things happen. So I'm going to show you a couple of photos now. This is the Russian tanker Lepea, 880 feet, full of refined gasoline from South Korea going to Baltimore, Maryland. You know that cargoes are sold multiple times while ships are en route? So if you have a load of oil or gas, and somebody's bought it in Baltimore, somebody else may purchase it in Spain or someplace. So anyway, they were headed to Europe. They were headed to Ponce, Puerto Rico, with 880,000 barrels of refined gasoline. They're hard charging here. They want to get to us, and we want them to get to us. This is the house, and this is an all-weather lifeboat. It's for the crew. And we ended up living up here And again, they're hard charging, and we'd see this thing up close and personal pretty soon. By the way, the Coast Guard's business is not to take photographs. Some of the guys on board don't have anything to do. The loadmaster isn't loading anything, you know? So they get out their cameras and they take pictures. Here's the Lapea hard charging, 880 feet. Look at the size of this white cap. You know, and that's what we're dealing with. Oh, and we're in this picture somewhere, but we can't find ourselves. This is one of the smoke flares. Here's another one, that's a half mile apart. The Lapea has to go sideways to the wind and the waves to create a lee where the wind and the waves are a little less. And they have to go in reverse propulsion, which they're starting to do here. But this is us. Not a problem finding us, right? Yeah. Look at some of these white caps. You know, they're far bigger than we are. But our day was starting to improve. So, this is, that's me. Buzz is in the middle, Bob's in the back, and there's a wave coming towards us. But we don't care.
How big is that tender?
10 feet. So, a couple of years pass, and I get a email. Are you the Ron Landmann that owned Painkiller that was rescued in the Caribbean 120 miles north of Cartagena? Yes. I was Mike. My name's Mike. I was on the crew. I switched to the Air Force when I moved to North Dakota. Unpacking my stuff, I found a camera, and there's a picture you may want. Well, now this one I am going to pass around. This is us, and this is about a 25-foot wave. And we didn't realize it at the time. We couldn't see anything. A 15-foot wave and a 20-foot wave, there's not too much difference. The Lapea starts going in a stern propulsion. You can see the water is going the wrong way. And here we are, and they're going to back down and create a lee for us. By the way, this great big ship was only manned by 18 people. There was only one person on the bridge at a time. So they're in a stern propulsion. They're trying to stop, and this is us in the raft down here. Now this is Sunday, April 30th, 2000. I watched the news this morning. They said tree pollen's bothering people.
Yeah, to a cough drop.
So they've created a lee. We're in a raft here. They launched the all-weather lifeboat. In the back, there's a turret. The guy driving that from back there can't see. We hear shouting in Cyrillic, Russian. And when they're about from me to Bruce, they throw a coil of line, it kinks, and jerks over to the side and falls in the water. Meanwhile, the guy driving can't see us, and he runs into us. There's grab rails all around. I grabbed onto it. Wherever they went, we were going. I was motivated, so were they. And by the way, this is the all-weather life raft. I'm holding handheld radio in the EPIRB. This is what the driver's looking out of.
Oh my gosh.
You know, closer to like being in a tank than anything else. So they're coming out to get us. We think we're going to be saved. We know we are. It's the United States Coast Guard. They open a hatch and they motion for us to get inside. I get my 2 crew members to crawl in. I pass in our bags. They hand us each a liter of sparkling water. It's like 140 inside. We're sucking down the water. They're talking rapidly. We don't understand anything. The officers speak English. The language of the sea is just like in aviation. It's English. So they maneuver us over to the La Paya. A Jacob's ladder comes down. Rope with wooden, There's lots of talk back and forth. The Jacob's ladder goes away. Okay. They maneuver us further down the ship. The Jacob's ladder comes down. They motion for us to get up. Buzz and Bob crawl up first. I crawl up third. Climb, actually. And I asked about our bags. And we're greeted on deck by the 3rd officer, a guy named Yuri. He says, "Don't worry, your bags will be brought to your room." We never saw the raft again. We don't know if they cut it free or if they stashed it on board. I didn't care. It had served its purpose. Now we're on a hard steel deck. We're in our Type 1 offshore life jackets. Yuri says, "We have 2 rooms for you, one with 2 beds, one's a single." I'll take the single. I have to reflect on losing our boat. They put us in an elevator with our life jackets on. There's no room. They take us up, and our sea bags arrived. And these things, they're not meant to be waterproof. Everything on the inside was soaked. So I take all the ship's documents out, passport. I'm laying $100 bills, 25 of them, around the room to dry out. Everything we have, I'm drying out. In the head, there's a towel from your high school. It was about this big, and you could hold it up to light and see through it. Remember those? Yeah. Lava soap from shop with the chunks in it. Oh yeah. I rinsed off, taking skin with it, wrapped myself in the towel, went next door to see how the guys were doing. They did the same thing. They rinsed off. Meanwhile, the same time, the captain walks in, introduces himself, and it's now 3 o'clock in the afternoon. He invites us to come down for lunch. Buzz has consumed quite a bit of salt water. He's not feeling good, but Bob and I are game to eat because we haven't eaten since yesterday. We go down, we get dressed, shorts and a t-shirt. The crew gave us t-shirts. We didn't have them. Sit down, sausage, beans, potato bread, and Kool-Aid with no ice. And an officer comes down and says, "Captain, the United States Coast Guard Rescue Coordination Center in Miami wants to talk to you on the sat phone." Okay. Go upstairs. They hand me the sat phone. The lady says, "My name's Serene." She was very serene. She said, "I have to ask you some questions, and when I'm done, I'm going to patch you through to your wife." So, do you know what happened? Yeah, we think we hit a log. Do you have any intent on going back and recovering your vessel? No, it was in very deep water. The captain, he's listened to this conversation and said, 3,500 meters. That's 2 miles. So I can't hold my breath that much. I don't care. She asked me a few more questions, and then she's like, "I'm going to patch you through to your wife." So now I have to tell Jane, we lost our home. Very emotional. But she also told me about her day. And she and my sisters organized prayer groups. Prayer changes things. Does yours truly believe in the power of prayer? Absolutely, on many, many levels. So she told me a bunch of other things, and I told her to open a bottle of champagne, drink heartily, because the La Paya was dry. These guys had left South Korea 4 weeks before, and any alcohol on board had been consumed. And if you ever wanted to meet 3 sailors who were looking for a cocktail, we were it. So, next day, we're on our way to Ponce, Puerto Rico, and we wanted to write out statements. They didn't have any paper, so we used the backs of the paper from the canal crossing and things like that. Bob and I, when we jumped in, we lost our large floppy canvas hats. And though we'd been in the tropics for 2.5 months, we got sunburned. Buzz kept his on. Which one is Buzz? Yeah. 2 of us are toasty red. They didn't have any first aid stuff, so for sunburn, they gave us calamine lotion to put on there.
Oh.
Yeah, yeah, a drying agent. So we put it on when we had to go see somebody, then we went back to our rooms and washed it off. It was painful. The crew was terrific. The Russians, very, very poor. The captain in charge of this floating bomb was making about $36,000 a year for that kind of responsibility. Oh, by the way, breakfast the next couple of days was green beans, sausages, potato bread, and coffee. They were running out of stuff. A lot of them were just there for room and board. When we got to Ponce, Puerto Rico, we anchored about 2 miles off. Jane had gone back to Alexandria, Virginia, and I gave her a laundry list of things that they did not have on board that we would like her to buy. The first thing was beer and wine, shampoo, toothbrushes, toothpaste, deodorant, anything for first aid, soap, you name it. They rescued us Sunday afternoon, 2-ish. Tuesday afternoon, they found a razor from the women's gym in some high school, and they said the 3 of you can share that. You couldn't cut butter with that thing. So Jane came on board, met the officers. I gave the captain a Meerschaum-handled rigging knife that the FBI had given me for some of my exploits undercover. We gave the other officers Leatherman tools. The Yuri, the 3rd officer, he gave me a Russian sailor's belt buckle and belt. Seems to be made out of tire material. It's kind of basic. I asked the captain if he could form a working party to go down and get this stuff. Jane got, let me see. She got 10 cases of wine, 2 cases of beer, and all this other stuff. We didn't stick around. Immigration inspector and a customs inspector came on and cleared the crew, but they couldn't clear us as U.S. citizens. We had to go to a customs station in Ponce, where we cleared in, and I declared Jane's jewelry, because I'm not a smuggler. Well, actually I am, but legally. I asked Jane, I said, what about us? You know, we'd given all the beer away. She said, in the trunk, there's an ice bag with beers. Where's the opener? In the front. She drove, we drank beer. It's about a 2-hour drive to San Juan. She'd rented a suite. She'd gotten hors d'oeuvres for our celebration. The pickings were kind of slim there. It was cheese whiz and crackers and a bottle of champagne. But it was fantastic. We had friends who lived there, and I made reservations at Ruth's Chris Steakhouse because there were 3 sailors who were still in need of a cocktail. So I called and I asked if shorts and t-shirts were okay, because Jane brought us each a little ditty bag with toiletries, and she brought us Painkiller t-shirts. So at Ruth's Chris, if you sailed with us, you got a t-shirt with our Painkiller logo on it. We sat down, ordered cocktails and dinner. Our friends joined us, and they wanted to hear a story. And then people started staring at us. probably because we were loud and obnoxious, but I think the real reason was they heard from the maitre d' that we'd survived a sinking 3 days earlier, 4 days earlier. And that's the important part, we survived. So the next day I took the guys to the airport, and then Jane and I went to the airport to fly back to Alexandria. And I got the phone number for the Coast Guard air station in Clearwater. I called, the secretary said, "What do you want?" I said, "I'd like to talk to the commanding officer." "What's your business?" I said, "We were rescued 5 days ago, I'd like to talk to him." Put me right through, Captain Ben Thomason. He introduced himself, he says, "I invite all survivors to come down and talk to our air crews." And I said, "That's why I'm calling, I want to meet the guys who saved me." We picked a date of 2 weeks later, actually, May 18th. Jane was, just by chance, being relocated to Brunswick, Georgia, as a special agent in charge of the custom school there. And I dropped her off and I drove over to Clearwater, Florida with my sea bag and some other things. At her house, at her apartment in Alexandria, all I had were formal clothes. All my other clothes were on Painkiller, and it sank, including about 60 Aloha shirts. I have an affinity for them. So I was dressed in a business suit, carrying my sea bag and some other stuff. I met the captain. He said, "We're going to go over to a hangar. We're going to meet all the air crews that are not flying." There's about 125. And interspersed are the people who flew 1717 that day, the aircraft number. Went over there. All these people jumped to when I walked in. It was actually the captain. And he introduced me, and I started giving the talk I'm just giving today, with a little bit of a change. After introducing myself, I said I was sailing from San Francisco. I said, "Captain, I don't think they recognize me." I took off my coat. I took off my tie. I dropped my pants. I had my red swimsuit on that I'd worn that day. I took off my shirt. They'd never seen this much white flesh in their lives. I took off my shoes and socks. I said, "Do you recognize me now?" "No." I put on my Type 1 offshore life jacket, my whistle, my mirror. I said, "Do you recognize me now?" And they're screaming and yelling. So I grabbed my handheld radio. I sat down, I put my sea bag on my lap. I grabbed a liter of water, I poured it over my head. I said, "Do you recognize me now?" And about 5 minutes later, I was able to start my talk. When I was done, I gave the command a plastic placard to put on the aircraft. I'm sorry. This is not emotional. This is pollen.
Want a cough drop?
Pardon me?
Want a cough drop?
No, I'm gonna hold down. To the men and women of the United States Coast Guard who make their living going in, maybe it is emotion, going into harm's way. Specifically, we wish to recognize the crew of Coast Guard C-130 1717 who, on Sunday, April 30th, 2000, located the crew of sailing vessel Painkiller, which sank at approximately 12 degrees 10 minutes north, 75 degrees 34 minutes west. The crew of 1717 consisted of Lieutenant Skip Deacon, aircraft commander, Lieutenant Jim Duvall, co-pilot, the one I talked to in the radio, Air AMT second Dan Maggs, flight engineer, aviation technician Mike Davis, he's the one who gave me the picture of the big wave, J.J. Thompson, loadmaster, Kobe Cox, drop master, Mike Brewer, aircraft. The three souls they saved were Ron Landmann, owner, captain, San Francisco, California, Buzz Mantle, Sonoma, California, Bobby Ogachuk, Kaneohe, Hawaii. Since this was a love fest, they gave me a plaque. And the survivors of Painkiller on that date with a picture of the aircraft. So we also Jane and I gave them quite a nice check for the Morale and Welfare Fund. I said, we have no influence, but if I were you guys, I'd have a party. Like a kegger from high school, or college. Well, maybe high school.
High school, yeah.
Depending on where, I went to Lake Tahoe, we had keggers. So what's happened to Jane and I since April 30th, 2000? Well, I was recalled to teach at the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center after 9/11 on a 3-year contract. I trained thousands of Secret Service and Customs and IRS agents. Not so proud about the IRS agents anymore. We watched our daughter get married. We'd given her an amount, but sitting in the raft, I said, well, let me back up. They were going to have a cash bar where their friends were going to have to buy drinks at their wedding at the Edgewood up at the lake. And I said, yeah, I'll just pay the bar. So we watched our 2 grandsons born. One's 19, one's 17. They want nothing to do with sailing, they're golfers. We've traveled extensively in Europe. We've spent a lot of time with friends in Hawaii. We purchased another sailboat in Georgia called the Usual Suspects. While we celebrated our 20th anniversary in Panama City, Republic of Panama, 2 months ago we celebrated our 43rd.
Hey.
I captained the Dixie, like I said, for 9 seasons. Transported thousands flawlessly across the lake and back. I've delivered numerous yachts up and around the East Coast and what they call the Great Loop down the river systems of America. And I've entertained thousands of children as Santa Claus and also thousands of adults. So maybe that was my purpose, being saved. I have no idea. If you have any questions, I'll be glad to take them. If you would like a complete article that has Jane's, what she went through, you can write your email on here and I'll email you the article. It's from a magazine. And if there are no questions, I'm done. Yes, sir.
Yes, I have a question. When these ships pass you by, obviously they didn't see you because you're small, but you wonder, who's on the bridge in front of these big ships?
Thank you. When we were going from where we were picked up to Ponce, we spent a lot of time on the bridge. It's about from here to the kitchen wide. And on one end is a VHF radio with channel 16, the hailing. On the other side, there's VHF with the channel 50 where the ships talk to each other. In the back of the room, there's they had a plywood room with a desk where the officer on watch had to log things from the engine room. They're in constant communication with the engine room. There's nobody looking. There's nobody listening.
Were they running by radar or something?
Yeah, it's on autopilot and radar. There's only one officer driving the ship at a time. The captain, the first officer, and the third officer. So they did 4-hour shifts, but there's no one up there. Yeah. And up in the house, you're looking down, you don't see anything. You know? And for them to scan the horizon, they're looking at 20 miles. Yes.
So what color's your dinghy?
We don't own one now. Jane and I have had, in our marriage, 17 boats, 2 motor yachts, 15 sailboats. We're kind of addicted to sailboats. We don't have one now. I bought a boat to teach my grandsons to sail. We're golfers.
Hey, can I say something?
Maybe they
Hey, Jane, I can send that out to everybody in the church.
Okay. Okay.
So they don't have to sign up.
Oh, I'll just mail it.
Yeah, just give it to me, and I can put it on the web if you don't mind. I'll put it right on the web.
It's been published.
Okay, it's been published, so I can handle that. It'll be on the web.
Yeah,
Now,
we did,
presentation will be there
we
too.
did several, yes, ma'am.
Notified her.
Okay. The question is, we're very intimate.
She has laryngitis.
But I'm gonna share. Here's what she said. She asked, who notified Jane? So, Jane, why don't you answer that? Why do I get in the way?
Okay, so I was in Alexandria. I was working at our headquarters there, and it was Ron's last open water lake going from Cartagena to Jamaica. I thought, thank goodness, he'd been through the Tehuantepec, going down Costa Rica.
Between Mexico and Costa Rica.
Okay. And I was thinking that if anything was to happen, it was probably one of those places. I'm thinking this last open water leg, if, I don't have to worry. Well, I did have to worry because I got a call from the Coast Guard about 7 in the morning and said, is Ron Landmann there? And I said, no. I said, I can take a message, do you like? You know how that goes. And so he said, well, this is the United States Coast Guard. And I said, oh. And she said, well, we've had a keeper go off that Ron talked about earlier, and it says the boat is sinking. And I said, it's a 45 foot sailboat, 3 people on board, and she interrogated me much the same way that the Coast Guard later interrogated him. And so she said, well, we'll call you back. They tried to send assets out of Colombia, but they didn't have any. They didn't have any assets that could go out that far, and so they sent down the C-130, to find them. And she said, "We'll call you back." So she did call me back, and she said, "We've had a second E-perp go off," and that's when my heart really sunk. I said, "That means that they have left the boat and they're in the raft." And I said, "Well, stop looking for a 45-foot sailboat." And start looking for a raft, like a white raft with, 3 guys in it. So, I'm thinking to myself, this isn't happening, this is not happening, but it was. So I had the decision I had to make as to whether or not to call his daughter, who was in Chico at college at the time. And I thought about it, I thought, it's possible that they will not survive, and I said, what I want to know, and I said, yes, I would rather know that there is hope, that he will be rescued, than to be getting a call saying, they didn't survive. So I called her. She immediately, threw up, and I called his sisters, and they started the prayer chain. And I think, to this day, that the reason that he was saved was because of the prayer chain. Like the one we have at our church with Joanne, and how important that prayer chain is. And I know it's been extremely important to me in my life. Was I upset? Yes, I was extremely upset and emotional. And I know when I called one of the other sailors who wasn't on the boat to let him know that the boat had sunk, I couldn't talk. I just literally could not talk. So I flew back down to Puerto Rico and was able to pick them up. And I told the Coast Guard, I said, thank you so much for rescuing my husband. He said, well, ma'am, that's our job. And I said, thank you for doing your job. And he said, ma'am, he said, your husband did everything he needed to do to be rescued. And I think that's an important part of this story, is that he was ready to be rescued. He had an E-perp in the boat. He had one in the life raft. They had an exit plan. They knew what they were doing, and the rest was left up to God. And God plucked them out of the sea.
I'm going to do 2 clarifying things. The third officer came up to me while we're on the bridge and said, yesterday was Russian Orthodox Easter. It was a very holy day for us to pluck sailors from the sea. And then he said, yesterday was your second birthday. I almost collapsed. It really got to me. And I have tracked Russian Orthodox Easter ever since that time. So about 2 months later, I get a package in the mail. Mr. Landmann, you're very well prepared to be rescued, but you were missing one item. And it's to the Painkiller and the crew, and all the crew members' names are on the back.
Oh, neat.
So they're just super people. And to this day, it's Coast Guard Foundation is one of the charities that we donate generously to every year. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'm just kind of amazed that the freighter goes by and they're well constructed enough to be able to rescue in the tough seas and everything. I wonder how many of these ships are really prepared to do that? These freighters and stuff.
They all
got
train,
crews,
yeah, under international regulations, they all train. And in some ports, you'll see them launching one of these all-weather lifeboats and going out and running the engines and all that stuff. And again, the poor guy in the back who's got to drive through this turret, he can't see anything. So, anything else, ladies and gentlemen? Thank you for your time.
And thank you very much for your presentation, it's awesome. Oh.
One more question.
Are we gonna whisper?
I just want to make it, I'm a survivor. I need a semi in